Hello, everyone. I am Alfredo Pascual, international analyst for MJB's Daily, speaking from Germany. With me, but speaking from Mexico, I have Lorena Beltrán, CEO of Cannabis-Salud, and Hugo Álvarez, partner of Canncura. These are difficult times all around the world. Legislators and regulators are focused on the current corona crisis while they need to maintain social distance. Unfortunately, cannabis legalization and legislation and regulation in general isn't a priority in most cases, and Mexico is not an exception. To speak about that, I have two local experts who will explain us in more detail the current situation. Hugo, Lorena, thank you for being here with me. And let's start with the current situation in Mexico and how coronavirus is affecting politics and society there.
Okay, Lorena, Alfredo, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. Alfredo, so far, according to the health officials, Mexico is still on phase 2 of the contingency for the COVID-19 pandemic. However, after a very criticized relaxed response of our authorities on March 30, Mexico declared a health emergency and issued a set of stricter rules aimed at containing the COVID-19. This measure includes the suspension of non-essential activities for a month, which means that many will remain home until April 30. Unlike in other countries, our government has not yet enforced a complete lockdown due to the concerns of the economy, right? Last Sunday, April 5, Andrés Manuel, our president, unveiled an emerging program for well-being and jobs. That's what it's called. And this program focuses on the reactivation of the economy, but it stays in line with what the current administration has done so far in the social programs, privilege to the million of Mexicans that live in poverty through handouts, right? So the feeling amongst entrepreneurs and businessmen is that its so-called program will be insufficient because it bluntly forgets to support the small and medium-sized enterprises, which employ most of the active population in our country, leading Mexico to an uncertain future, and an economic crisis. So finally, we choose to stay positive during the last Sunday announcement. And also, we think that after this crisis, it is undeniable that the administration will be in desperate need of a revenue. So, and in our current government persisting in this line of thought, right? So this could be the push that we need to finally legalize cannabis. That's what we hope.
That's a good point there. I mean, it's hard to think about it that way, but maybe the crisis is what Mexico finally needs to finally promote this bill and end up approving this bill in the parliament. But Hugo or Lorena, tell me a little bit more about what's the current situation in the Senate and the lower house, which are the ones that need to approve this bill.
Yes, so the last day that they were working in the Senate during the last session was March 24th. That was the last day, and they were released, and they are coming back on April 30th. So nobody in the Congress, Senate, diputados, the Supreme Court even, and yes, unfortunately, we stopped in the middle of the first official step taken by the Senate, which was the approval of this law initiative, the first approval in the Senate. Then they needed a second approval we call it the approval in the general. Everybody, kind of agree to the initiative. Then they have to do some reserves. They were going to change and make some observations, do a second voting on the particular things of the initiative, and then it was going to be, it will pass to the Congress, the House of Congress, the diputados, right? So that's when it stopped. That's when this unfortunate situation started happening, and they had to be released from their jobs. So yes, we are thinking that when they come back on April 30th, that's the end of the sessions, where the time that they have to vote. So the next sessions start in September. However, they are talking about still trying to vote on this law initiative right after April 30th because they're asking to extend the period of sessions.
Okay, so to recap, the parliament had a deadline by the Supreme Court to legalize by April 30th. And they were sort of going in that direction when they approved it in the Senate in general terms, not the final, not a final decision, but in general terms. And then they needed to do this second approval in the Senate, let's call it, and then the lower house. And that's when it got stopped, the process, right? So we have a bill that is approved in general terms in the Senate, and then because of the whole crisis, the Senate had to stop working, and now we need to wait until they start working again, right? Because right now they're only attending urgent matters.
Correct.
So if I understand correct, they come back on April 30th, but that's the last day of the ordinary sessions period, right?
Yes,
correct.
If you let me, I can tell you one thing. Right now, there is no specific date for when the Senate work will be renewed, but
All right.
everything points out that the Senate will let slide this regular session period, which ends on April 30, and that any further legislative work will have to be done by calling the Congress to an extraordinary session or
They will
another.
talk in summer then maybe.
Yes, maybe. It all depends on the COVID-19. Or the other opportunity that they have to pass this bill is to throw it to the next normal period of sessions, right?
Which starts when? In
September. Yeah.
Okay, so then we have simplifying, we have two options now.
Yeah.
One, if we are lucky or if we want this approved as soon as possible, is that when they decide to come back to work, hopefully soon, they will say, let's work in summer because we have a ton of things to do that we couldn't do these past weeks, right? And maybe they approve the bill in summer, right? That's a possibility. Another possibility then is that they say, let's talk about this again when we meet again in the next ordinary sessions period, which starts in September. All right.
Yes.
Do you think this is a priority right now for the parliament? I mean, let's imagine they start working again in a couple of weeks, back to normal and catch up with everything. I imagine they have a ton of things to do, right? Is cannabis what type of priority?
It's hard to say, you know, if it's going to be a priority or not, but I can tell you that by having some conversations with senators and diputados in the last few days, few weeks, they are very concerned about the economic crisis that's starting right now in Mexico. So of course, they need to find solutions. They need to get creative. They need to implement new programs. They're talking about implementing programs in agriculture and other areas, of course, and cannabis could be in this list of plans or projects to help the economic crisis. Of course, it's not going to be number one priority because we know that it's not the only industry that can help us economically. But yes, definitely, they're looking at it. They want to know more. We're seeing more interest in the Cámara of Diputados, who are the ones that implement the taxes on the products, on cannabis per se. So yes, they are aware that cannabis could help us. So they are trying to get as much information as they can. And they seem to be very interested in pushing this forward a little bit faster than what we think.
Thank you. That's a really good message. And maybe to finalize this interview, one last difficult question, and it is, legislators seem to be in Mexico sort of between two different groups. One of these groups is companies, especially foreign companies, that obviously do not want some of the limitations that the bill has. For instance, limiting foreign investment to 49%, also limiting horizontal and vertical integration. And these companies are probably lobbying for a more flexible or friendly with investing bill. But then also legislators are being pressured by civil society activists that want the bill to, let's say, protect as much as possible the local communities that should be the ones reaping the benefits from legalization. And these activists normally understand that foreign companies are not the best way to do that. So do you think that the bill would change now one way or another? With this, I mean limiting more foreign investment or limiting it less, now that we have this crisis and the economic factor of legalization is much more important than what it was before?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that without a single doubt, the bill will be modified before it reaches the floor. These kind of bills have to come from a process of consensus. And even thought there is an agreement amongst most of the senators that cannabis will be legalized, right? So there's still a lot of differences that maybe we can see in the law. But about these two groups, I think that what this exercise is trying to do is to have a medium point. I mean, the bill is not perfect, but in general terms, it's a good bill. We're having all the uses in one time, right? So I think it has good intentions. However, it's a little bit restrictive to entrepreneurs and especially for cultivation and commercialization of the psychoactive. So I think that's like one of the most things that the government has on their eyes, right? In another hand, I think it limits just the bill, this one, it limits the cultivable area to 1 hectare outdoors and for, yeah, and 1,000 square meters indoors per licensing. So I think Lorena can tell us a little bit more about that. But there's a thing that we've been thinking about the needs of this new emerging industry. And we came up with an idea of suggesting a new process of implementation for recreational licensing at the beginning. And let me try to explain this idea. The idea is to go first for the cultivation and point of sale licensing. Why? Because we have neighbors, America and Canada, that already has legalized, right? So imagine what's gonna happen, because when the bill passed, to wait for a committee to reunite to start giving licenses on the recreational side. So in the time between, cannabis will be decriminalized, but the internal market will not exist. So we aim to importation, and after this happens, what we can ask for is low taxes to seek of secure products to feed the Mexican market while the national industry is formed, right? So I think we have a different scenario than in another legalization times, right?
Lorena,
yeah, definitely.
Any final thoughts about how the crisis could affect the content of the bill?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think they are going to rethink the way that they structure this initiative, because if we are trying to look for solutions for this crisis, then we have to push for agriculture points of sale, just as Hugo is mentioning, because right now are the licenses that are going to be giving at, the last licenses are cultivation and points of sale for recreational. And those are the ones that generate the most taxes, well, the points of sale, and that's what we know. And we're looking at the United States and other countries where the dispensaries remain open and continue sales, and our government is looking at that as well. So definitely rethinking the way, the timeline that they have for these licenses. And if they are trying to push for programs on agriculture, definitely I think that's going to change. Licenses for agricultural to cultivate cannabis first, and then also the points of sale, because if they try to open just for importation, that's not going to help at all. So yes, of course, the crisis unfortunately is something very negative for a lot of people in terms of health and economics, but also we have to see the positive side of everything. If we stay positive, then we can be more creative and have these new ideas and rethink the way this initiative is structured, and it will definitely change and it will definitely benefit Mexicans.
Thank you, guys, and obviously fingers crossed that Mexico legalizes at least this year.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thank you, Alfredo.
Thank you, Alfredo.
Bye.